If you were watching the last couple of minutes of that live, sorry about that, I had to go and check whether I had to answer a door. As it turned out, I didn't. False alarm, but I did promise. False alarm again. Now I'm on top of the situation. Not my usual locale, so I'm figuring out how the beeps and whistles work. Anyway, so apologies for having to cut that short, but I did promise that the videos and this channel would be as authentic as possible. So you'll get it sometimes raw, exactly as it is. One of the reasons for doing lives, I think it's important that everything isn't hyper edited and manicured and preened and polished and filtered within an inch of its life. That does also mean that, yeah, you'll get interruptions and things will go wrong. Like the time a few days ago when the camera fell off the holder that I had it in. Anyway, back to this idea about emotional capacity. If you've already joined the live, I will summarize a little bit what I said, but I'll do a little bit of a catch up in case some people are just joining right now. And what I was saying was that I like metaphors. I think they are important. And I've used a metaphor already to talk about emotional capacity, and that was a rechargeable battery, implying that we use energy during the day, we've got to recharge. Another way to think about it is a hose, a garden hose, because most of us have used a garden hose, and you'll know when you compress, when you squeeze the hose, that it changes the water coming out. It changes, normally it makes it narrower and certainly tends to increase the pressure. Same idea with blood vessels. If they become too narrowed, blood pressure goes up because there's a smaller space for the fluid, the blood, to get through. Same idea, of course, with the hose. And so if we have the same amount of water flowing into our lives, and that water represents the trials and tribulations of daily life, the water represents those things that are stressful to us, as in not necessarily good stress or bad stress, but just stress, things that get us going, but also does include those things that are distress. Then when that happens, what it means is that the amount of water flowing through, if we do not adjust the diameter, if we don't adjust the size of the hose, then the pressure goes up and we feel the pressure. And if you think about it, we talk about, I've got so much pressure on me. It feels like the weight of the world. I've got a headache. I've got backache. It manifests, but ultimately, I'm sure there are some exceptions, but ultimately, most of the time, the pressure that we're feeling is from within. It feels like it's outside us. And yes, yeah, if you're lifting weights, then the pressure is out there. I get that. But most of the stuff we're generating by how we're representing things. And I would also suggest who we're in conversation with, but it's how we process it internally. And so if we have the same amount of stresses coming into our lives and we're okay with it, then all is well and good. If that amount of water coming through the flow, the amount per minute, per hour, gets greater and greater, and we stay at the same diameter, the hose stays the same size, and we cannot increase the size of that hose, then the pressure goes up. And so we can do two things. We can change the water supply upstream. We can do something there in our lives to reorientate things, to restructure them, to get help, to find a different skill set, learn that so we can cope more easily. So absolutely, that's one way to do it. And I'm not going to focus on that, but it doesn't mean to say that that's not essential. In fact, it is often crucial. But let's presume that we can't do anything about the flow upstream. What can we work with? We can work with increasing the capacity, how much space there is in this hose, how much capacity we have to cope with those slings and arrows of outrageous normal life these days a lot of the time. And when life itself is generally stressful and then one or two other things come in, you can see how that's the equivalent of more water coming through. So what have we got to work with apart from that upstream stuff? We've got us, we've got ourselves. How can we increase capacity? And what I was starting to say before I had to finish off prematurely the last video was that there are three things that I think we can focus on. There are more than three, and some people wouldn't split things up in the way that I'm going to, but I found it to be useful for me and other people over the years. So number one is to look at psychology, look at physiology, and then look at existential existence or existentialism or philosophy if you want. So psychology, physiology, and our existential selves, our psychological self, our physical self, and our existential self. And let's then start with the psychology. This is, I suppose, stuff that, well, I've certainly talked about and a lot of people do, but it's worth, I believe, going over again, albeit in a relatively summarized form, because we hear this stuff, but we don't always do it. So what can we do in terms of self-care? Another hackneyed term, I appreciate. Sometimes I feel I need to think of a different phrase. But anyway, self-care, let's stick with it. Well, we can make sure that we take care of ourselves. So it's the classic, it's exercise, it's meeting up with people, that could be online, it could be face-to-face, who boost us. Humor is often missed out in the mix. Humor is something that I believe is really important, but more and more these days, it would seem people are kind of scared to make a joke because, well, somebody will be offended. Most people who aren't screaming about something online are actually mature enough to know it's a joke. And also they appreciate the humour. And I'd be the first person to say, let's not go out of our way to be offensive. Of course, not what I'm saying at all. But humour, having a laugh. When's the last time you had a laugh with someone, face to face, online, a group of people, or watched a funny movie or a TV programme? Notice what it does. Laughter, humour is a way to reframe things that is unlike many others. You know, how we frame, the frame that we put around things, or the lens that we look at the world through. When you listen to a good comedian or indeed watch that funny movie, it just gives you a slightly different perspective. And of course, laughter, smiling, and very often laughing together collectively with a group or someone else is such a boost for us. So psychologically connected to dealing, interacting with other people, humor, very important. And also, I think in terms of who we are associating with, do we want to be in a negative environment or a positive one? Not a ridiculously positive one where no one can say to you or me, that didn't quite work. How's about thinking about it this way? Because if everybody's always going, oh no, you were wonderful. Oh no, you were wonderful. Oh my gosh. Then it gets a little bit like, you know, I imagine some parts of Hollywood to be where no one dares criticize the person who's making the amount of money for the studios and the cinemas, etc. So everything they do has got to be wonderful, at least to their face. So we don't want that. That's sycophancy. That's no good. That's not healthy for us, not healthy for anyone else. And what can then happen is that we end up with yes people around us or an echo chamber. That doesn't mean to say that I don't think people should be supportive. I think they should. But sometimes we need to hear things. We need to hear the harsher truth, but not necessarily delivered in a harsh way. We need to hear that, that didn't quite work, or how you came across there was like this. That's constructive. And of course, we also want people around us who have our best interests at heart. And I've called these people over the years the critical friends. People who are critical to our well-being and success. They don't have an agenda. that is political. Their only agenda is to help us. And in helping us, they will be honest. We might disagree with their perspective, but we will take it on board and we will be enriched, even if we disagree with the perspective, because we've found a different way to look at us and indeed potentially our situation. So friends, laughter, supportive group, but not sycophants, not an echo chamber, not yes people. What else can we do in terms of self-care? Well, the stuff you've heard of before. Exercise primarily. If you can't get out in nature, look at photographs of it. I hate saying that because it sounds a little bit flippant and it's not meant to be. Studies have shown that that also gives us a boost. And yeah, even just opening a window and looking out can be really good for us. And not only can that exercise be done and is important for us, but theoretically, if you're lucky enough, it could be done outside, and it could be done with that group of people who you enjoy the company of. If that's you, some people like to exercise on their own. What else can we do in terms of the psychology? Well, we can look at our own selves in terms of meditation. So we can sit and meditate. We know that's good for us. We can get into that state of flow, like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi discussed years ago, when time distorts, it stands still or it speeds up. We're so involved in a task at hand. Could be learning a musical instrument. It could be constructing something. Could be working indoors on something, or indeed outdoors. Now, then let's move on to the physical. And I've already touched on it when I've talked about exercise, because of course, exercise is also physical and it's also psychological, in my opinion. And these things, again, like the old Venn diagram, will overlap. And that's one of those overlap areas. So what else can we do physically? One could argue that meditation is physical, kind of. Certainly exercise is. I would suggest that what we can do physically is to look at our diet as well. We now know that inflammation is the leading cause of many things, or at least an important contributory factor. And that includes issues which can become, let's say, psychiatric in nature, to put it that way around, but also physical stroke, mental. And our diet is so important. We now know that the gut is connected to the brain. We now know that via the vagus nerve, our gut biome is so important to us. And more people, thank goodness, are starting to talk about that. And I'm not here to give any lectures on diet, because sometimes my diet is good and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes I weaken in the face of certain temptations, but generally speaking, a varied diet, high in veg, and then depending on someone's, I suppose, belief systems, the amount of meat or zero that they consume. And indeed with animal related products, that will vary from individual to individual, and I'm certainly not here to advise or judge, but to point out that by and large, for most people, it would seem that veg in the diet is, and the more of it, the better. Now, I know there are other diets out there that I won't get into here, where it is, let's say, high protein, and yes, that's a different approach. And for me, each to their own, and I can't and shouldn't comment. My main focus here is to say that diet is really important in terms of our physical and our mental health. And we should all consider what we consume and why we consume. And I think more and more, we should definitely have a conscience about it. That's what I would say as an underscore to those different types of diets. So a conscience about what we eat is important, and why we eat what we eat. Then what else can we do physically? Well, you've probably heard about the cold water idea, where cold water immersion is so good for us, and that it is good. Again, it is suggested it helps reduce inflammation. There's mixed results from some research on that, and it is also suggested that it helps with things like depression. hot exposure, like in a sauna, so sort of the cold shock and then the hot shock treatment, so to speak, is also apparently beneficial to us mentally and physically. And once more, each to their own. So those are the things, there's more than that, but again, I don't want to labor this, that we can do physically. I've talked about psychologically. I want to get on to this thing that I've called, I could call it philosophical, but I think it's probably more accurate to call it existential. What do I mean by that? And I think this is one of the big things in terms of capacity that we should focus on. So if you imagine we're trying to increase the diameter, if we need to, or the size of that hose to be able to cope without any ill effects, without the hose being damaged, from the pressure that is coming in from those things, the stressors in our lives. And so we can do those things physically. We can look at our diet. We can look at cold water. We can do those things psychologically. We can make sure we're having a laugh, meditating, physical and mental potentially. And we can hopefully get support from individuals or groups of people. Existential, why are we here? I've said this before, where do we come from? Why are we here? Where do we go? And people have got different variations of that. Some people's religion says, well, it's like this. And again, that's great. I wouldn't question it. That is good. Having, I suppose, an overarching idea, as it's sometimes called, is generally beneficial to people. And of course, there are different religions out there, but that seems to help. And most religions, or at least most interpretations of most religions, suggest that we should do good when we're here. And I think that is key. But that doing good and making a difference is connected to something I've talked about before, meaning and purpose. And that's why I believe that setting goals are so crucial. The goals can be short term. How much exercise, learning that new skill, getting up to a minute and a half in cold water at about, 5 degrees or 0 or whatever you can stand. And those are good goals to have, because the more we do things that stretch us a little bit, the better we become, the better able to do those things we become. And there's some research that suggests that may be really enhancing for us in terms of our will to live, to be around. But that's a subject for another time. I'm going to do a deeper dive into that in due course. So other goals, those longer term ones, I believe are definitely connected to our time here on the planet. At the end of our days, what do we hope to have achieved? If we look back, let's say it's our 85th birthday, maybe we've got a lot of years to go, hopefully. But if we look back over our lives from like now until then, but we're looking back the way, we're 85, looking at us now, what do we want to have done? And this is when I get back to this concept of, if all we ever do, and I know some people are reductive in nature, I know some people want to dive right into nihilism, and none of it means anything at all. To heck with it. It doesn't matter. And so this is really addressed to those people, and I respect that. I don't agree with it, but I respect it. If we believe that it means something and we don't think that it's all for nothing, then what have we done with that time? For us to be at our 85th birthday looking back until now, or indeed further back, what would we want to have achieved? What have we done? What is the good that we've done? What have we put into place? Who have we helped? What are those things? And we can't do everything for everyone, of course, but when we get out of bed in the morning, if we have a vision, and it might not be until we're 85, this could be in steps, so 85 is more a trend, who is it that we want to be? You know, that old idea of when we meet someone, we say, what is it that you do? What's your job? Let me try and suss out how much you earn. We tend not to ask, who are you? What do you represent? Why are you here on the planet? Because it would be odd. I appreciate, you're at a dinner party or something. Who are you? What do you represent in terms of your life? What do you want to have achieved when you're 85? Probably not a good opener. Maybe after a couple of whatever people drink at dinner parties, then those drinks. And and so if we think about that, if we have those goals, short term and longer term, it gives us a reason to get out of bed. That helps us as well handle the stress because we're moving in one direction. We're moving towards something that we think is important. And I don't know if you've noticed that when you are in a place and a space where you are focused on something and you've got all these other factors in place to help protect you, physical and psychological, then it is often easier. I'm not saying always, but it is often easier to keep on going because you have that outcome or those outcomes in mind. And so if we're not nihilistic, and I'm going to presume that if you're listening to this so far, you aren't, but you might be, and that's fine, then what's the opposite? What's the flip side? If it's do as thou wilt, and who cares? If it's that, then there's no point, in my opinion, of being around. Why would we just be like that? That phrase that I borrowed in an earlier video from Lily Allen, a weapon of massive consumption, or mass consumption, as I like to call it. Just to take in everything. Just, oh, I'll have that, I'll have that. Whether it's physical, food, drink, and it's just, this is all we do, or whether it's just TV, movies, or we go and visit places and buy the t-shirt, that's all that we do. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that stuff, but if that's all that we do, we're not putting anything back. We're here, generally speaking, for a purpose or purposes, for more than one thing. So who are we at the end of our days? Who was that person? Because if you think about it, let's say it is your birthday party and there's a few people there and they're celebrating your life. Do you think when you're 85 that you're going to be impressed by someone saying you had the biggest car, you had the biggest house, you flew the most number of miles to go on holiday? They might say that, and it might be a nice thing. But if that's all it is, what's the point in that? Is there any point in that? To me, that seems extremely hollow. That is a hollowed out life. It's so, let's say, basic. It's so base. I believe we're more than that. I believe people are more than that. This existential thing. There's this calling to do something that's bigger than us. And so maybe you, like me, would like people to say, well, they were there in a crisis. They were there when the chips were down. They helped that individual. They didn't have to. They gave off their time. They were supportive. They weren't perfect, but they were supportive. They did a lot of good. It's generally what most of us want to hear. And so we can help ourselves by doing that stuff, because if we have those goals to do that, whilst looking after self, charity does begin at home. You've got to take care of yourself first. You've got to put the oxygen mask on you first before you can help other people. Hence a focus on the psychological and the physical. It's one of the reasons I've parsed it out that way. Then we're more able to do that stuff, that higher calling. Doesn't have to be religious, but it could be for some people, so that we make a difference with the skills, the abilities, the attributes that we have, the talents. We don't sit and hide the talents, we use them. We use them to some good effect. And if that good effect is simply to get adulation and buy a car and a yacht and a jet, then again, that's so empty. That is just, in my opinion, a waste. It's a total waste of resources and time and talent. So what are you going to do about it? Have a think about it. I think about it pretty much, well, at least once a week, but often on a daily basis. How today can I apply those things that I have? Meager as they may be, but if they can make a positive difference, what can I do? Also remembering, oxygen mask on first, take care of self first. And ultimately, if we do that, and if we have that thing that we're striving for, that we want to help people with, I believe that ultimately that can increase the capacity of that hose, of us, our capacity to handle things, to be resilient, to handle that stress. Because we're doing something which is meaningful. That is ultimately, for a lot of us, where the meaning and purpose comes from. And within that, of course, I would include family and family members. Anyway, I hope that that made some sort of sense, and managed to go through it without an interruption this time. So thank you very much for your time. If you're still listening, I haven't seen any comments. If they have come up, I apologize. I haven't seen a thing, so I'm just guessing that they haven't. On this app, they seem to just come and disappear, but I don't think anything came up. Anyway, thank you so much. Let's find a way to switch this off. Okay, there we are. So if you want to leave any comments or questions, please do. Bye-bye.